Hi, I'm Regan Robinson, your host of Future Fit, the only podcast unraveling the secrets of how the world's most innovative leaders stay future ready in a fast-paced world. I've spent over 20 years as a futurist and strategist, transforming top global brands and putting investment-backed startups on paths to sustainable growth. Along the way, I've become obsessed with new ways to prepare for the future, because thinking about the long term once a year simply isn't enough. In each episode, I talk with movers, shakers, and path breakers who share their stories about how they turn uncertainty into their strategic advantage. Throughout our journey, we'll discover unconventional and imaginative ways to help you thrive today while leading your teams into tomorrow. Future Fit leaders know that being prepared for what's next is more than a business decision. It's a way of being. Let's venture together as we co-create a new future readiness playbook. The future can't wait, and neither can I. So, are you ready to get Future Fit? Welcome to this spotlight episode of Future Fit, where my special co-host, Lori Mazan, and I dive into how the most innovative talent leaders are reimagining leader development to future-ready their teams and cultures. Lori is president and co-founder of Sounding Board, a trailblazer in the leader transformation space, offering high-impact coaching, mentoring software, and strategic program design for top-tier clients like Chime, Zoom, and the Wellstar Health System. I've had the pleasure of hosting Lori previously on my show, and so I'm excited to bring her perspectives and expertise to this important conversation. And today we are thrilled to have Angela Cheng-Cimini join us. Angela develops talent roadmaps that support the business strategy and create deeply engaged and diverse workforces. And she's the Chief Human Resources Officer of Harvard Business Publishing. For those not in the know, Harvard Business Publishing helps leaders move the world forward and is an affiliate of Harvard Business School, serving as a bridge between academia and enterprises around the globe. Angela sits on the Alumni Board of Directors for Cornell University and is a member of CNBC's Workforce Executive Council, which is a body of CHROs dedicated to advancing the practice of HR. Angela is also board director for the T. Howard Foundation, an organization dedicated to increasing diversity in the media industry, and she serves as an advocate for the AAPI community for several nonprofits. Welcome to Future Fit, Angela.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining Lori and I. So let's jump right in with a question that I ask everyone who comes on the show, which is, what does future ready mean to you?
I really love this question because it talks about intention, right? It means not just sort of blindly fumbling into tomorrow, but actually being ready for whatever that might bring. And I think given what we do here at Harvard Business Publishing, I don't think we can have a conversation about readiness without talking about humility, which is that we can't control our future. We can't control the environs around us, but we can prepare our response. And so we talk a lot about this organization being a learning organization, and that each one of us are lifelong learners and that we're students. So I think that if we wake up tomorrow prepared to respond in the most open-minded, unjudgmental way possible, then we can be prepared for whatever happens. So when consumer grade AI showed up, right, if instead of running away from it, we learn to explore and test and eventually embrace it, then we have in some way made ourselves ready for whatever that technology will bring.
I love that framing because it's really speaking to the current environment where so many things are unpredictable these days. And how we used to develop leaders in the past was a more predictable kind of long-term pathway. And now, you have GenAI, you had the pandemic, they have economy that we've never seen before, like so many things that leaders need a way to be able to be prepared for the unexpected future and still be able to, as you say, embrace it and be successful in it.
Yeah, well, and I especially love, humility is a topic that I talk about a lot. I have a lot of ingredients of the future readiness recipe. You will probably hear me say that a lot because there is a big cake that I am baking, right? And so I think humility is definitely core to that because part of my perspective is a lot of, I think, what gets in the way are fear and ego. And when it comes to uncertainty, of the future, you really have to let go of that fear and ego. And that's where sort of being grounded in this humility and curiosity. And you also said intentionality, which is another one of my favorite words, really being intentional about how you cultivate both the capacity and the capability to be future ready, I think is really important for our listeners to know because, this is not a one, just like constantly developing who we are as leaders. And Angela, you mentioned cultivating an environment of learning. This is a journey and not a destination.
Mhm. Well, I was interested that you kind of defined humility as knowing where you're in control and where you're not, and being able to embrace the places you're also not in control, which I think is a very interesting definition of humility.
Yeah,
Mhm.
because I think leadership ego, particularly now in our current definition of leadership, right? It's evolved so much. Leadership 20 years ago was very hierarchical, very command and control, top down. And now we're learning to be authentic and vulnerable and practice empathetic listening. And that is not about the ego. That is about making sure that you're leaning into the needs of other people. And the better that you can serve your teams, the better they will serve the objectives and missions of your organizations. So humility has to come into play.
Mhm.
Hey,
Absolutely. Well, I think another sort of capability, if you will, or mindset that I think is very germane to humility is agility. And agility is yet another essential ingredient of the future readiness recipe because it's not just about responding quickly. It's actually about seeing change before it happens and exploring potential scenarios and what the potential implications could be for your company, whether you're talking about strategizing for your future or what the implications could be for your employees. And true agility is really being uncomfortable or being comfortable with the unknown, embracing experimentation and taking calculated risks, even when it feels counterintuitive. Now, Angela, you've said that you're using AI to become more strategic and proactive with a big emphasis on this agility and forward thinking. We'll get to the AI aspect in a moment, but first, what role does agility play in developing your leaders at Harvard Business Publishing? And how do you ensure that your employees are developed to be comfortable with this uncertainty that we've been talking about and risk taking?
So if you remember the roots of our organization, we came out of publishing. So Harvard Business Review celebrated its 100th birthday 2 years ago.
wow.
Oh,
And so companies that we've written about are no longer in existence. And when you think about what goes live in a magazine, right, it's edited and it goes through rewrites and it's presented in front of how many sets of eyes before it goes live. It practically needs to be perfect before it's unleashed into the world. And so some of our organizational roots I have found follow that approach, which is, gosh, we need everything to be perfect. And so that is counteracting agility, right? That is not most conducive to living in the messy middle, to trying something, iterating, right? That whole process assumes that what you're putting out there is only 70% baked. So we have had to unlearn some of our habits. We've had to try and practice just throwing things out there and seeing what sticks. And that is part of a journey that we are still on. We are not nearly as agile as we would like to be. We have agile experts throughout the organization who continue to teach us, continue to remind us. And it is a muscle that we are currently still developing. So it is hard to shake off where we came from. But I remember just recently, I was with some folks who released a press release and there was a mistake in it. Well, thank goodness it's not in hard copy because all they had to do was go and fix it digitally and it was fine, right? The error disappeared and people who hadn't read it had no idea. So there is a part that technology has to play as well in helping humans be more agile. So learning how to use the tools, learning how to adopt the right mindset is all part of the journey to get us there.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think that agility really has to do also with pacing. So as a 100-year-old company, the pacing of business has been speeding up fairly dramatically
Oh,
over that
yes,
length of time.
yes,
And being from more the venture-backed startup environment, we know if we get it to 100%, we miss the market opportunity.
that's
The timing is just too fast. So we have to put it out at 60, 70, 80% and then repair as we go, or we miss the opportunity. And it's a very different way of thinking than I think a lot of us traditionally grew up with.
that's right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, what's coming up for me, I think, is, and you said this word, Angela, it's not just about skill building, but it is about this rewiring of the mindset so that your leaders view ambiguity, as a competitive edge and not a hurdle, right? Because then this can sort of create ripple effects across your company and can kind of help foster bold and forward-thinking ideas so that your teams are more future ready. I also think agility is it's how you frame it and how you frame risk taking, right? It's like framing risk taking as a path to uncovering opportunity, right? Versus you mentioned vulnerability a few moments ago versus something like failure, and talking openly about failure, I think are things that really kind of all come together when you're trying to shift the mindsets from this more linear way of thinking and working into something that is really what I think modern business and leadership demands, which is very nonlinear, very messy.
Yeah,
Right.
it's feeling like a fail and learn environment now because when you're embracing all kinds of new technology, you're not going to get it right the first time.
And
And
fail fast,
yes,
not just fail, but actually try and get the mistakes out of the way so that you're getting closer to the things that work.
absolutely. Yeah, that failing actually helps you advance
That's right.
versus blocks you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, I like to remind leaders, no great innovation ever happened within the comfort zone, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly right.
Right. I don't know if it's because of how I was born and who I'm wired to be, but every day in and day out, I am pushing myself outside my comfort zone. And I recognize that most people are not that way.
Mhm.
Right. And so that's why I always remind people this is where the intentionality comes back in. Being intentional about getting yourself outside your comfort zone, I think is really important, across your company and your teams.
Mhm. I mean, you all mentioned fear around that, and I think people connect fear and getting out of your comfort zone, but I actually think it's just a little more neutral, which is we're very pattern oriented and
Mm.
habitual in the way our brain works. And we're just used to a certain way of doing business or operating. And it really takes almost like an outside force to jump us out of that and start to create new patterns. It's like the basic law of physics, right? Things at rest tend to remain at rest unless a force is exerted upon it, and something like technological advancements or economic impacts are forces that then cause us to change our patterning. And then I actually think it goes the other way. It's disconcerting for people when their patterning is being changed,
Mm-hmm.
due to outside events.
Well, Regan, you talked about scenario planning, and that is an effort that organizations should be doing more of, right?
Right.
Chasing down the different pathways of things that might happen, preparing for what is most likely versus what's optimal, and then planning appropriately, right? So it's always good to have some level of preparation because I think that's also future readiness.
Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. Two of my favorite questions are what if and what could be. It's actually that simple. And if you start to get folks in a room to really start to imagine, my approach to foresight and scenario planning is actually very much rooted in imagination and intuition as opposed to data. And some of those are big questions that I'm often asking leaders and their teams because I find it quite shocking the amount of people that aren't having these conversations. And the other, ironic, if you will, thing about it is that studies have shown when you spend time in the future, in your mind, right, that it actually reduces stress and anxiety.
Oh,
Yeah. And so there's this connection point. So I'm like, yeah, I know it is fearful, and people are like, oh, this uncertainty. And believe me, I get all the pushback in the world when I put my futurist hat on. But yeah, there's actually data that proves that when you spend time in the future mentally, that it starts to reduce fear and anxiety because you've actually gone there. I call it imagination training, your muscles. It's open, and on top of that, it opens up new neural pathways. It hones your cognitive abilities. So now,
And the
Laura,
corollary to that is goal setting. Right? We know that the act of
yeah,
setting goals, and in particular, if you take pen and paper, it fires neurons in your brain and you're much more likely to achieve them, 30% more likely. Just the simple act of writing down and capturing them. So in its own way, right, that is the imagineering of your future,
yeah.
right? And then manifesting that for yourself. An organization should be doing that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, speaking of technological advancements, Laura, you mentioned that. Let's pull in the AI thread a little bit, but let's hone in at the intersection of AI, because it's a huge topic, AI, future readiness, and leader development, because they are deeply intertwined. AI is reshaping how companies anticipate future challenges, how they foster leadership capabilities, and actually how they personalize their approaches to continuous learning. So it's a tool and a catalyst for building future-ready leaders who can navigate this complexity that we've been talking about, embrace innovation, and really lead their companies towards sustainable growth. And so, Angela, you've mentioned that AI is helping you become more strategic and proactive. So we're curious, how do you see AI enhancing agility? We've been talking about agility in developing your leaders, and what opportunities does it create for maybe some of your future ready talent strategies?
I think we are still trying to establish the foundational and the fundamental levels of comfort and skills that people just need to know that it's not a scary technology. So we're actually later this week going to be taking the organization through a simulation, and they're going to be using an LLM to basically start a snack food company. And they're going to do everything from naming a product, creating packaging, doing market research, creating a marketing launch plan. And if they have time, they'll get extra credit if they can create a jingle for it. And it is intended to be a not real life application of GenAI, but to show that you can, in the course of an hour, become a product designer, a marketing expert, an analyst, and a user experience expert within an hour. And so I think if you can demonstrate that this technology can help you pivot through all those different roles, even if you have no background in any of them, that might show that it can help you be more agile. So think about then applying that to your own core competence. So for my team in human resources, if I can use AI to get me faster to develop a policy or to develop a 2-hour training or to help a manager diplomatically write a sensitive email to an employee, right? That equips our managers to be able to move through different roles much more quickly than they might otherwise because they're not stressing on their own because now they've got a tool that can support them through that. So we are just starting to get, our organization comfortable with that. We're pushing them along in that journey, but I know that we'll get
there. Mhm. I like that combination of using technology in relation to your own capabilities and expertise. We always talk about this thing like 1 + 1 = 3.
there.
I think for me, the best use of Gen AI so far is that formula where you're able to enhance your own thinking and abilities. One of my questions really is, how do you see this playing out in specifically in leader development? And one thing that's interesting, Angela, Sounding Board has partnered through some of our customers with Harvard Business Publishing with some of your content that you deliver. And the organization through you all delivers the content. And then we add coaching on the back end of that to help the transfer of learning of that content to their daily life. And it's like the third, if you add the third piece in there around Gen AI, I think it could be like 1 + 1 plus 1 equals 10 or something, because now you have this exponential way to take your content and have it come alive in the workplace.
That's exactly right. So we really want to be able to deliver just-in-time content, right? So I'm currently struggling with this human issue, with this challenge that I'm having on my team or at work, and I can ask in natural language and get some advice, get some counsel in real time. And so that helps the leader be more confident around how they might respond. Or it could also just be a productivity lift, right? Because I don't have to synthesize all this data because GenAI can do that for me, but I'll be spending my time instead turning that data into insights. So that makes me a more effective leader. That makes me a more effective insert title. So I think all of that is yet to be fully realized, but the potential is certainly there.
Yeah, what I think it's really interesting, Angela, is listening to you, really marinating on how you framed how you're teeing it up for your teams around, hey, this gives you the ability to play multiple roles, right? Like I actually think that's a really unique framing. I hadn't, even though I'm using it all day, every day, whether it's for marketing or for branding or for innovation or as an assistant and it could be because I personally am more, you guys are probably familiar with this term. I'm a T-shaped person versus a deep like expertise person or a super specialist, if you will. And so because of that, I feel like I'm always playing in all these different zones. But when you said that, that really struck me as something that is compelling that I think people need to understand of like, okay, wow, no, this enables you to be more of a strategic Swiss Army knife in maybe some areas that, you have less experience or you're not as comfortable. And then the other thing that was coming up for me, it's almost like, and then as you start to experiment and explore in these new, disciplines or domains, it's almost like having a coach that is sort of coaching you to wear these new hats, these different hats.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, it is absolutely going to be revolutionary. And then not to even mention the fact that you can offload and outsource all the lower value work to GenAI to free you up to do higher order thinking, and really focus in on the things that require leadership and require human interaction that artificial intelligence cannot yet replace, which is, empathy and EQ, things that all of our teams still desperately need.
Yeah. So what's coming up for me is sort of a follow-up question for you, Angela. So speaking of coaching and AI, do you have a perspective on how you might see coaching and AI working together to sort of deepen the impact?
Yeah, those products are already out there, right? I mean, there are already coaching bots where you can input a scenario and it will give you many different responses, and you can tweak it for tone. You can ask it to be more assertive. You can ask it to be more compassionate. You can ask it to be, whatever tenor or volume you would like it to take. So I think that's really helpful, particularly for early career managers who haven't yet found their voice or who aren't yet quite confident in handling particularly sensitive conversations. So it's in real time, it's in a safe space, right? Nobody else has to see you doing the experimentation. But what they do see is the result of someone having gone through some practices on their own and then come prepared for the real life instance.
Mm-hmm. I like that. And then maybe adding some human-based coaching to that situation, because when we were talking earlier about authenticity, if we're only using the language that we're getting from technology, we're missing that empathy and human component. So I think blending that technology with maybe a human coach who can help that early leader identify their particular brand of leadership and human interaction. So it comes off as real to the other party in the conversation versus the restating of something that you've created through Gen AI. So I think that blend of getting that help with the thinking and the positioning and the approach, and then somehow getting some additional help in making it really your own and authentic to you.
And I think that tracks, right? I mean, right now, certainly the advice is don't take everything literally, right? Take everything with a grain of salt. Make sure that you're fact checking, that you're pressure testing, and doing that with the human is double insurance.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now, what's coming up for me are publishing terms that I own, editor and curator, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Make sure you're editing and curating. Well, I think, AI obviously is presenting, it has the potential to unlock a lot of good stuff, right? And bad, but we're going to keep it in the positives, the positive vibe zone, right? So speaking of unlocking potential, Angela, you've said that at Harvard Business Publishing, you're unlocking the leader in everyone, and that it's your obligation to make sure that people can optimize their performance because you're creating the conditions that allow for that. I love that. I always talk about creating the conditions for future readiness. That's why my show is called Future Fit. I am trying to draw a corollary between fitness and exercise. That's about creating conditions. So I love that. And again, I find this really compelling because future readiness is a way of being, this capacity and capability that needs to be cultivated continuously, and is not a one and done or an annual activity that gets checked off a list. And so by creating these conditions, you're not just future fitting your leaders, but you're actually future fitting your entire company's ability to grow and succeed. And so how are you continuously evolving your leadership capabilities to stay ahead of future challenges? And maybe what's been the biggest surprises or even hurdles along the way?
More than ever now, I'm really trying to listen and lean into the organization to pick up signals because there is so much noise and there is so much content that's competing for our bandwidth. So it means really being very discriminate around what is it that you're hearing, shaking out what's real from what's false. And so that when leaders decide to take action, it's on the basis of something that's true and credible. And it's certainly what we try to do with our content, right? It is well researched. We know that our brand is powerful because people can trust it. And so, in the same way, when people come to us for leadership advice or anytime they pick up a copy of HBR, they know that it has been really thoroughly vetted. And we want people to be able to read an article and immediately apply what they've read. So, to your point about the bridge between academia and application. So when we try to prepare our leaders and unlock them, what we're saying is that anyone can be, they just need to go through the journey to finding their own voice, to finding the confidence, and to finding the skills. And we believe that's our mission. And so that organizations can have a positive impact on the world. And it doesn't matter whether you're in the classroom, it doesn't matter if you're in your first manager job or you're already in the C-suite. We believe that everyone is constantly on a learning arc, and we hope to be, right alongside them in that journey in real time.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think it's gonna be impossible to be future ready without being a continuous learner. So
That's right.
yeah.
Now you have it in your pocket on your phone, right? And you can open up the
so
HBR
easy
app
now.
and you can ask it any question, and it will pull content that will hopefully help you solve whatever challenges you have that day.
Yeah, well, and Angela, I love how you mentioned sort of the listening component and the human component. I find it's like in my work, I'm always the misfit outlier anomaly. It's been that way since I was born. And so in my work, everybody always wants to talk to me about technology, for example. And I'm like, no, I'm not the gal to go to. I'm actually more focused on the human aspects of the future's possibilities and where paradigm shifts, enduring human needs and motivations are actually evolving, and what are those opportunities actually present. I personally think that technology is a accelerator and a tactical thing, and so that's why I'm more interested in all the human aspects. And so I just think it's, in order to thrive today and be future ready, it's no longer enough to be operationally excellent. Leaders need to cultivate this deeper, more human-centered understanding and connections and really build trust, building these psychologically safe spaces, having compassion, transparency, vulnerability. Like, I know I'm throwing out a lot of words, but I feel like they're all important, and they all actually each are nuanced and play a very important role, or have a unique function when you actually are trying to stay ahead of future challenges.
Mhm.
Interesting that you talk about psychologically safe, charged term. It's probably akin to DEI now being something of a lightning rod. And so at the end of the day, I think it's less about whatever term you apply to it. We just need to practice it.
Yeah.
And I think we know the research shows that having diverse perspectives gives you a better outcome.
Yeah.
We know that when there's equity in the workplace, all boats rise. And we know that when people feel included, that means they feel heard and they can contribute, which only, strengthens the organization. So to me, there's nothing poisonous about DEI, but fine, if it gets some people's backup, we don't have to talk about the 3 letters, but just go about doing the work. And the same thing with psychologically safe. I mean, anything overused just becomes camp. And so we just need to do the work to make sure that people feel like they can speak up, they can call it like they see it, and they can participate in the problem solving process.
Yeah. And I love that because the basis underneath that really is still the listening that you started with. A long time ago, I worked for a training organization that taught listening, and that organization surveyed something like 500 CEOs in North America at the time, maybe 30 years ago. And those CEOs said the number one trait they looked for in an executive leader was being able to listen, which was really interesting because I don't think a lot of listening was going on back at that time. But I do feel like now that is still a critical skill set and capability. And one thing I do with my growing leaders in my organization is I have them listen and look for patterns they see happening across the organization that are unnamed or unstated. And then to name those and start to put plans into place to impact those either positively or in a way to end those patterns that aren't helpful. And that listening, deep listening and observation of patterns and themes in the organization is a skill set that I don't think a lot of people have, but it's so valuable in the basis for really this trust development and ability for employees to state their mind.
Yeah, I think that's right. If it was so easy, then every organization would have a great culture.
That's
Right.
right.
Because they would tell you exactly
right.
what was wrong. You would know exactly what solution to apply, and we would move on to the next thing on the list. But
Yeah.
it's not that simple. So it is about parsing out through everything that you hear, really leaning in, talking to people, asking questions, and then really listening for the answer. Because it is never presented to you in a gift box. It is always shrouded in something that's probably not psychologically safe. There's probably someone who doesn't feel like they have an equal platform to share what they're thinking. And so it is incumbent upon leaders to really practice that listening. And then that goes hand in hand with humility to say, I don't have the answer. I'm looking to you to help me find it.
Yes, and listening not for the answer they have in their head, but for the actual
That's right.
content and information that the other party
Because that's
is
not really listening, right? That's just
No.
waiting until your turn to speak.
100%.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting about this part of our conversation is a lot of the terms that we're talking about or things that we're saying, so separating signals from the noise, listening, pattern recognition, those are actually all the things that I do as a futurist, and the capability building that I do with leaders when helping them think like a futurist. And so I think there's an interesting, dynamic here at play around, because awareness is half the battle, right? And once people start to understand, okay, wow, as I start to think about pattern recognition across the board, what are the various ways that I can look at pattern recognition, whether it's internally and it's more of a culture building or culture hurdle issue, versus also then what are the patterns that I need to be spotting and looking for within the market, and what is that telling me? Right. So I don't know. I think there's this interesting play, dynamic that has emerged based on what we're chatting about. And then the other thing that I would add, 2 things, I guess, is I'm always advocating for leaning into your intuition. I feel like we are overloaded with data, and data itself is actually not a strategic advantage. It's actually how you take that data and what you see and how you harness it and how you connect the dots, whether you're strategizing for the future of your company or the future of your culture. I think that's really important. And all of this, for me, is really underpinned or rooted in well-being. And so, for example, my approach to foresight and strategizing for the long term is actually rooted in well-being, because if you're not taking care of yourself in all its forms, mentally, emotionally, physically, financially, socially, you're not going to see.
Spiritually.
Right? And then that's where this fear and ego and the scarcity mindset starts coming in, and starts getting in the way of things. And so when I'm working with the leaders to really start to cultivate their capacity to imagine what the future could be or what the possibilities could be, a lot of the starting point is, all right, well, how are we feeling? How are we taking care of ourselves and our people? Because I can promise you that if you start from a stronger foundation of being well, you're actually going to be able to do this work with much less effort.
Amen.
I mean, it really is very basic. If you're in survival mode, the only thing you can think about is surviving. You're not thinking about tomorrow's food. You're just thinking about your next meal, because that's all your capacity that you have in that mode. So moving beyond for survival mode to a place where you can think beyond, the next thing to many things down the road is inherent in being a futurist and being future thinking. To really be an exceptional leader, that it's the same leadership capacity as it is to think out in the future. That's inherent in the activity of being a leader.
And that's why organization transformation is best taken when you are already operating at your peak performance.
Yeah.
Right? Because you already have momentum, you're flush with resources, people are feeling good. But that's actually when inertia tends to set in, because we become complacent. Everything is great.
Yeah.
And to your point about forces, then creating motivation for change, if you wait until you're in crisis mode, it's so much harder to take change, because everybody is down. Your business is probably suffering. You probably don't have all the resources. You probably don't have all the agency that you would have when everything is flying high. So it's one of those really interesting ironies of life, is that we change only because we have to, not when we're at our peak health, when we can do it best.
Yeah.
Oh, that is so brilliant. That is a brilliant, that's a brilliant statement right there, because I think the natural human tendency is wait till everything arcs down to make a change. And yet people who are most successful in their careers
and you
make a
can
change at
jump
the
to the
top.
S curve. That's right. You
Yes,
jump to the next
yes,
S curve when you're at the peak, not when you're at the bottom. That's exactly
yes,
right. That's right,
yes.
Lori.
Yeah, well, and data bears that out in terms of bottom line results, because research shows that once a company hits a major stall in its growth, it only has a 10% chance of ever fully recovering.
Really hard. Yeah.
Yeah, I always say you can make money off a declining business model for a really long time. we see that happening. And so part of my hope, I guess, slash ambition slash mission on this earth is to actually change that perspective. Short-termism is a disease, right? As I love to say, hear me using lots of health analogies. Because what I'm trying to help people understand is this level of future readiness and having future ready leaders. I very much see it through the lens and the purview of health. It's your company's health, like all of these sort of things tie together. And once you sort of create that momentum, I really feel like you're unstoppable. So why make things harder on ourselves, right?
Why indeed?
So let's explore unlocking the leader potential a little bit further. So Eleanor Roosevelt observed that a good leader inspires people to have confidence in the leader, and a great leader inspires people to have confidence in themselves. And this really resonates because having confidence in yourself goes hand in hand with having confidence in the future's possibilities. And when leaders foster self-belief in their teams, it really unlocks this capacity for innovation and risk-taking, which are obviously critical qualities for navigating uncertainty and future challenges. But as we've kind of been talking about, this work isn't for the faint of heart. And people need support along the way. And we did talk about coaching earlier. And so, Angela, what advice might you have for using coaching as a key strategy in preparing for leaders for the future?
People spend millions of dollars on coaches. And I think it comes full circle, which is we have to be willing to take the coaching We have to be willing to understand that there is something to learn from every interaction, whether that's learning from a bad example or learning from a good example. So in many ways, the content that we provide is meant to be a coach. It is, here are some best practices. We've already gone through the pain. You can skip that and go right to the learning. We can tell you that people have come before you and have experiences and wisdom to share. So coaching is everything. And it begins with the leader being willing to reciprocally be coached. So I learn as much from my team sometimes, if not more, than they learn from me. Right? I mean, a sign of a good leader is they've assembled the best people around them and let them bring their A game. It's not about hiring a B team so that I can exert my control, my opinion, my influence on them. It's really about having everybody be great. So the coaching has got to be a two-way street or a three-way street or an AI street, but whatever it is, coaching has to be a component.
Yeah, having had a private coaching practice for 20 years, one of my favorite experiences was at the end of the coaching conversation, I would say, "Oh, I should have paid you for this conversation because I learned so much."
Yes, yes.
If that was happening, that means we both learned so much. It was worth every penny or 10x that amount. And that's the most like generative type of learning and conversation that you can have, both people really feeling the value of the conversation.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, when my kids were much younger, I used to say, I fully expect that one day you will be smarter than me. Today's not that day. But now they are wonderful humans. They're 27 and 25. And the increasing frequency with which they are now teaching me something indicates that they are going to be smarter than me someday soon.
Yeah.
And so the reverse coaching is coming full circle.
Yeah. We'll never underestimate the power of intergenerational learning, right?
Yes. Yes.
And diversity of perspectives. Like, I feel so grateful that, like, I was home in Ohio recently and, updating my dad on my life. And he's like, God, he's in his late 70s. And he's like, it's so interesting that you have friends that are like 25 and then you have friends that are like in their late 50s. And part of that is part parcel because I live in Manhattan and I'm exposed to, but I feel so grateful that I'm able to dip into all these different cultures and lifestyles and experiences. And, Angela, you mentioned diversity of perspectives. I mean, that is also part of the secret sauce of future readiness. You have to get outside your comfort zone. You have to, stop narrowcasting and focusing on the familiar. That's one of the biggest mistakes I see leaders making. And so I think really exposing yourselves to different, ways of thinking and perspectives is just super important.
Well, I actually think the workplace is really facilitating that right now because we have like 6 generations in the workplace. And
For the first time ever.
in my own organization, like some of the employees are 30 years younger than me or 35 years even. And if I'm not willing to learn from them and treat them as an equal in our relationships, I am dramatically missing out on ways of being, information, ideas, approaches that I would never have access to based on my experience.
Mm-hmm.
That's that leadership ego that we were talking about that comes out of being birth.
Right.
Yeah. So, Angela, a final question before you share where listeners can find you. In your view, is preparing for the future more about managing risks or capitalizing on opportunities?
Both, because you will encounter.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to learn how to mitigate it. You have to learn how to respond to it, but it is also about anticipating it so that it doesn't realize itself in the first place. So I think those are muscles that need to be developed in equal part. I don't think it's an equation that is valuable if you only try to future proof and right. Like if you prepare for every eventuality, then you will get nothing done. But if you just figure out like, well, I'll just respond when it happens, that's also setting yourself up for preventable failure. So I think that the really facile leader can do both.
Yeah, love that. And with that, Angela, where can people go to find out more about you and your work?
Well, thankfully, I am the only Angela Cheng-Cimini on LinkedIn. And so if people want to reach out, just let me know that they heard me spend time here in Future Fit, and I'd be happy to connect.
Love that. Well, thank you so much for your time and your brilliant insights, Angela. It's been enlightening, and Lori and I have had so much fun exploring with you today.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been a great, wide-ranging conversation. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Future Fit. If you're listening, you're probably future curious. So follow me in my newsletter on LinkedIn to keep the conversation going and share your discoveries with the Future Fit community. And if you enjoyed this episode, remember to subscribe, rate, and review Future Fit on your favorite podcast platform. Until next time.